Today marks another milestone on this Corvette build. I started this project about 11 months ago or so. If you've been watching my channel, you've seen me done quite a bit to it. I pulled that body off, stripped that frame down to a bare frame, had it sandblasted, painted it up, and then started putting it back together. It's got a Ride Tech suspension, front and rear, so it should ride more like a modern car. It's got a Borgeson modern power steering box in it. It's being powered by a LS1, backed up by a 4L60E transmission, using the stock rear differential, but again, Ride Tech suspension on the back end, coilover shocks, chip foose wheels. The body was completely stripped down to bare fiberglass. Made a few modifications. It used to have fender flares on the rear. I put those back to stock. Added a third brake light right there. All the wiring's been done on that. I posted videos on most of these changes, so check out my channel. You can kind of see what's been done to it. I've been doing as much assembly as I can. Once the body's on the chassis, I'm not going to really have good access to this firewall, so I went ahead and put as much stuff on here as I can. The brake booster, my hood latches, this is a cruise control module down here. I've got my air conditioning hoses coming out here, a couple of circuit breakers mounted down here. Over here's my computer, the PCM, the fuse block right there, and then the junction for my wires coming out here. All of these wires here are for the sensors on the engine and the transmission. Mounted my windshield wiper motor. Went ahead and ran my wiring up here for the headlights, and the headlight door motors are Detroit speed units, a lot more efficient, better operating than the originals. So I've got them installed because it's a lot easier to do it now than after the fact. Inside here you can see I've got some sound deadening mat on the floor in the back of the firewall. Then I installed my vintage air conditioning unit because I needed to get those hoses routed through the kick panel and then out to the engine bay area. Got all these wires hanging here. Most of these are from the main wiring harness. I had to install a junction box, fuse block, relay block right here, cut a hole in the firewall to mount that. So I've tried to do all that stuff that's easier to do now than after the car is put together. So I'm going to roll these two items in the garage here, see if I can't get the body back on the frame. I'm getting my body rigged up underneath my lift. I'm going to use my lift to raise the body up. I've got all my body mounts in position, and they get shimmed different amounts depending on how the body needs to set on there. And I've already had the body on once when I was checking clearance around the engine up to the firewall and the transmission tunnel and what have you. So I think I'm really close, and I'm going to pull them back off of there because I don't want them falling off. And on these rear mounts, I'm going to tape some dense foam over them because when the body comes down in the rear, it's real close to that. In fact, you kind of got to jostle, wiggle the body a little bit to get it underneath one side and then drop it in on the other side. So I don't want to be scratching my paint. Okay, it's looking reasonably centered, especially on the front. The back, the tail, I'm going to have to kind of shift it over just a little bit, about 2 inches, as I get a little closer. Just gotta go slow and easy. Anytime you feel it or see it kind of catch somewhere or touch something, gotta go make sure you're not breaking anything. Here's one of the little problems right back here. And you know, I put this kind of dense foam over it, but the way this body comes in, it's got to tuck around under it, but coming down, if you're not careful, you'll get this caught up and bend it up here and possibly crack something. And on the other side here, you can see I'm in the same situation, but you almost have to get it lowered down and let these flex a little bit, and then come back here and pull one out, pop it under, then the body will slide over, you can pop the other one under. Okay, see, I've got it just over and under it a little bit. I'll go to the other side. Now on this side, I can, looks like I'm out on the outer edge, so I can go ahead and let this down. Okay, now I'm below on both sides. Now I'll go ahead and put all my spacers, body mounts under there, like that right there. Well, I think I'm doing okay. What I'm doing is putting a 2x4 right there to kind of keep the body pushed over on this side, because I don't have the chassis centered under it perfectly on the back end here. And maybe that'll help guide it down in the proper location. Well, maybe not. Things keep getting knocked off. Looks like this needs to come back a little bit. That's pretty close. On these rears, I'm having a little trouble getting this in position because it's got that little shoulder on it and it sets up into a recessed hole. And so what I'm going to do is put some glue or something on here and then get this stuck up in there so that when it comes down it'll be in line here, because it keeps getting offset. Okay, now I'm gonna drop some bolts in all those holes and then keep letting it down and try and guide them into their location. Okay, I've got some bolts hanging down in there. It's sitting on there. Before I take my straps off, I'm going to see if I can wiggle it around and get all the body mounts perfectly lined up, straight up and down. I've been messing around with it for a while. I was off camera, but I'm doing several things. I'm measuring from the frame over to the body, front and back, trying to make sure it's the same on both sides or fairly close. In the back here, I need to make sure my fuel tank cap is centered in that hole, and that looks pretty good. Another thing I was monitoring was down here. If you can see, I got a bolt stuck through there, and you can see, get it just right. It's fairly well centered in the hole in that mount. So that's about as good as I'm going to get that. And I looked at both front mounts and these rear mounts here. This one's not as easy to see. I actually need to get a flashlight. But anyway, they're fairly well centered too. So like I say, I don't think I'm going to get it any better than that. So I just let all the weight down on it. I'm going to take my straps off and tighten a couple of bolts down so it won't move. Then I'm going to try and get it on the lift, raise it up, then I can take a better look from underneath at everything. Let me take a look in here. This mount, make sure it looks good. Oh wow, look at there. I might need another little shim on it, but at least it's lined up. Same thing on this side. All right, I'll go ahead and put a couple bolts in there just to make sure these things the shims don't slide out. And then when I get it up on the lift and I can get a better look underneath there, I may need to add just a little tiny spacer to that one and the other side. Now I've got it out from under the lift and on the lift and checking it all out, making more measurements. I determined that this side here needed to come up about 1/8 of an inch. It was just a little bit out of square left to right. So I just put a little bottle jack here, jacked it up a little bit. Right here's the mount. So I just slid in a couple of little shims like this right here. And to get it shimmed from side to side, I'm just making measurements from here down to here, making measurements from under the fender well down to here, from under the parking light down to here. And you know, these bodies weren't made perfect. They're not perfectly 100% parallel and square and everything else. So everything's gonna be a little bit of a compromise, but I'm getting all these measurements within, a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch, the same on both sides. So that's gonna be plenty good, I believe. And I haven't tightened those front bolts down yet, but now I want to come back in here to this bolt, this mount, and make sure my shims that I got under here are just, you know, almost the exact space I need. This is a hard shim, not any rubber. And so if I can get that where it just barely slides in, why, that'll be ideal. I don't want it to be too thick where it's putting a bow in this section going forward here, and I don't want it to be too small of a shim where it's trying to pull it down the other way. I want it to be just a nice slide in fit. So that's what I'm going to work on now. I'm going to move to the back now. I went ahead and tightened down the bolts up front here, the ones that were underneath the doors right here. These, of course, I had already locked down first. These are in rubber donuts, top and bottom of the mount. Those two up front are just solid blocks, aluminum spacers. And then the one back here also sits in rubber. I don't know why they did it like that, but that's how they did it. So what I did is I've got a little screw jack right there where I can push the back end of this car up and down a little bit. And I'm going to be looking at the gap. And you see it's a little bit closer down below than it is up top here. So that tells me I need to raise the back of the car up. Over here on the passenger side, it's kind of the same situation. Not too bad here, but a little bit wider gap at top than I got down below. So I'm gonna just adjust that back end until I get it as close as I can get. And then I can determine how many shims I need to put back under this mount here. And I just got those bolts all tight. Everything's aligned the best I can get it. My gaps look good on the doors here. From this peak downward, I'm within 1/8 of an inch all the way across. This gap is good. So that pretty much wraps up the installation of the body onto the chassis. And I'm not sure how they shim these bodies at the factory, but what I've done here today seems to work okay for me at least. And then I can set the ride height exactly where I need that by adjusting these coilover shocks right here. I did have a few shims left over that I didn't need. And I've also got the bolts and spacers for the radiator support. So there'll be maybe a little bit of adjustment when I put that in. But this body mount kit I bought had everything I needed in it. All the bolts, washers, nuts, spacers, rubber cushions, everything. I got this one from Corvette Central. And it comes with instructions that have little diagrams that kind of show you which spacers and washers and what have you go on each mount.